Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 Ally Self-Publishing Conference. I really hope you enjoy a session where some fantastic authors and a publisher, Will Dady from Reynard Press, AP Beswick, and Samantha Young, share lots of advice, tips, experience, and knowledge on their publishing journey so far. But I wanted to talk about some of the specific things that we're seeing in IngramSpark as it relates to trends within the self-publishing space in the UK and more broadly. So one of the things I wanted to start with was around metadata optimization. Now, metadata might not seem like the most exciting subject in the world, but it's certainly one of the most important when it comes to book discovery and book sales. So a trend that we're seeing is authors spending a lot more time optimizing their metadata. And what does that really mean? Well, optimization is just simply making better, making more useful, making more relevant, and keeping an eye on it. Metadata isn't something that you should do once and then forget about for the rest of your life. Metadata should be something that you approach as a sort of little and often job. And there may be some books that don't require huge amounts of change from one time to another. But if you're writing books about history or that have a seasonality around their sales pattern, then you might want to make sure that your metadata is appropriate for the time of year. You might find that you receive a new quote that you want to include into the metadata. Let's say you're writing a historical novel and there's an anniversary for the subject. You want to make sure that that's all reflected in your metadata. So a big trend that we're seeing is authors paying a lot more attention to that. And the results show both in discoverability of books and in sales of books. Let's not forget that it's an extremely competitive world out there. And if you're writing in genres where the competition is fierce, let's say romance or crime, it's really important that your book stands out from the crowd. And one of the ways you can do that is by ensuring good quality metadata from the very beginning, but something that you keep up with over time. And obviously your metadata can be something that you look at in your IngramSpark account. And by using the Ally code that allows you to make updated revisions, you can make sure that you're going into your account and applying the correct metadata as and when is necessary. Another trend that we're seeing a lot is direct to consumer selling. So this is where authors are selling directly to their readers, whether through a website or through another direct to consumer platform. At IngramSpark, we've launched Share and Sell in the UK and the US, and many of you will be familiar with this. This is where you can create a shoppable link that you can share on your website or your social media for readers to click through directly and buy your book from a storefront. And we're going to be launching some fantastic developments of this tool over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, which include multi-ISBN capability and also the ability to design your own branded storefront so that it looks and feels exactly like an extension of your author brand and on an author website. So selling direct to consumer is a really powerful way of connecting with readers and people that are yet to discover your book. It means that you're in a little bit more control about the price around your book. So you can set the discount that you need. You don't even need to set a discount at all because you're selling direct. And so we would ask people to think about direct to consumer selling. How can you harness the power of e-commerce and AI to optimize your books ready to sell to your readers directly? Related to that are our websites in general. So whilst not a new trend, we always remind authors that it's important to have a place where your readers can find your books and that is built in a tone that is an extension of you as an author. So having a website is a really powerful way to do this, and building a website that has a newsletter attached to it is another really important thing and another important way for you to connect with your readers. We're seeing authors now generate reader lists in the thousands as a result of their newsletter. And it's a place for you to connect directly with your readers, for them to find out about new books, events that you might be doing, any special editions that you might be thinking about doing. You can do prize giveaways. You can do all sorts of different things within your author community directly through your website and your newsletter. So again, whilst not a new idea, it's a trend that hasn't gone away and one that's becoming more powerful over time. We would encourage authors at any stage of their journey to think about having a good website. A trend that is really important to Ingram and IngramSpark is that authors think globally. So what does that mean? Obviously, you might be based in the UK or the US or somewhere else, and your primary concern will likely be your domestic market. And that's fair enough and correct. But what we would encourage you to do is to think globally as well. You will often be surprised that as soon as you enable your books for distribution into IngramSpark's global distribution network, you'll start selling books in those markets. And it's always an extremely interesting and fun experience when authors start to receive compensation notices from places like India or Brazil or Italy or Spain, which happens on a daily basis with IngramSpark customers. So we'd encourage you to think about that and think about what steps you need to take to make sure that your books are optimized for global selling. Are you applying global pricing? Are you considering publishing your books in different languages? So we're seeing a huge boom in Spanish language sales, in Arabic sales, in German sales, and other languages around the world. So think about your book, think about your readership, and think about the potential, how that could grow globally. Is there any reason why you shouldn't or couldn't have readers in different international territories? And what do you need to do to make sure your book's set up in the correct way to take advantage of that opportunity? So we'd always encourage authors to contact us and ask more about global selling. How can we help you optimize your books for selling globally? And I think you'd be surprised by the results. So that's something that we're really excited about continuing to educate our authors and publishers on, and a trend that has grown quite consistently year over year. And then finally, the last trend that I would speak to that's front of mind at the moment is getting creative when it comes to book design. As many of you will know, in a print on demand environment, the variety is not endless, and there's a very good reason for that. But we can still produce really, really beautiful books, whether in paperback or hardcover, hardcovers with a jacket. But what we've seen over the past year is authors becoming a lot more creative with some of the limitations of POD technology. One thing that we have probably all seen from time to time is when a book has a sprayed edge. Well, what some of our authors have done, and I have an example for you here, is use technology to create what we call a printed edge. And I hope you can see that. And I hope it's coming across well in the camera. But this is where someone has essentially designed the edge of the page within the Book Builder tool on their IngramSpark account to create a designed edge, which in effect looks like a sprayed edge. So it goes all the way around, top, bottom, and side. And there are lots and lots of different examples of this. There are people that have used colors. There are people that have used just simple designs. You can go as wild or as easy as you like on this design. But what we do encourage you to think about is that this is a creative way of developing print-on-demand technology to create something truly unique for your readers. Now, we probably wouldn't suggest that you need to do this on every single one of your books, but think about those special editions, those customer giveaways, whether you're going to a special event, whether you are creating a hardcover version of a paperback book, or a paperback version of a hardback book. Is there something that you could kind of latch this opportunity onto to make it feel really special for your readers? And again, please do contact us to find out more about how to do this. It's relatively straightforward. It takes a little bit of practice, but you can do all of that within your IngramSpark account. And then I think the final thing I would say is start to think about what your book publishing strategy is long before publication dates. Having a pre-order strategy is really, really important. And it's what traditional publishers do all around the world. Start thinking about how you can engage your readers 6 months before publication date. And we are working on tools to enable you to do that in IngramSpark more effectively. So thank you and good your publishing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session with IngramSpark and the Alliance of Independent Authors for the 2025 Ally Self-PubCon. I'm really pleased to be joined by three fantastic people today who will introduce themselves. And in this session, we're going to talk about a range of different subjects, but really the main premise is around connecting content with readers. So with that, I'm going to quickly hand over to Will to quickly introduce yourself. Will, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, thanks very much for having me. My name's Will Dady. I publisher at a small press called Reynard Press. So in a sense, we're not really self-publishers, but I think we've got lots in common between us today. We've got a list of, I think, about 160 active titles. We've been going 5 years almost to the day, and we have a sort of split in our list between classics, so bringing out lesser-known books by authors you know and love, like the juvenilia of Jane Austen, say, but also our contemporary writers are split across fiction, non-fiction, theatre, and poetry. So quite a broad list of writers of life. I also oversee the Indie Press Network, which is a group of about, I think, 82 currently small presses from the UK and Ireland that work together on marketing and events and so on. So that's kind of us very quickly. Shall I
Fantastic.
hand
Thanks,
over?
Will. Yeah, go ahead. Hand over to whoever you want to.
Well, you're left on my screen, Adam. Do you want to go?
Thank you very much. My name's Adam Beswick. I am a fantasy author and I have 15 books out with 3 currently in development between now and March that will be releasing. And as Ben mentioned earlier, I've also stepped into indie publishing. So we now have 6 authors that we work with to produce their books as well, all in the fantasy genre.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. And last but no means least, Samantha.
Hi, I'm Samantha Young. I've been publishing books since 2010. I've written over 65 books and I write contemporary romance and romantic suspense, mostly set in Scotland.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. 65 books.
Yeah.
I saw everybody's eyebrows raise when you said that. That is quite a feat. Well, great. Thank you. And we're really, really pleased to have you here. And I know you're going to share some really insightful thoughts and hopefully some practical guidance for listeners to go away with today. So my first question is around brand. And what do we mean by brand? And what do you think of as a brand when it comes to either your publishing business or yourself as an author? How have you built your brand and what does it mean to you today in terms of connecting with readers? So Samantha, would you mind starting?
Yeah, I think of brand as basically your identification as an author and the thing that an audience will immediately understand about your books before they even, dive into them. The thing that's going to make them pick up your books. So I think it's really important that you have a clear brand, not just for, online ebook sales, but also because it's really important to booksellers, bookstores, because they need to know where they're going to place you in their bookstore if you get to that point as well.
So I think it's a tough question to start on, branding. So for me, branding is extremely important to your books or your publication company. I think it's a way of building a community that people can identify with, and that can be done with either. I'm laughing because my wife always tells me when I go to author events or reader events, she knows we might be going out for a few drinks afterwards. Adam, remember, you are the brand. So in other words, don't do anything stupid. And it is that it's what you allow in our industry your readers to see, that again that they create that association with you and help to form that basis of a community. Then you have your deeper levels. So for example, part of my branding is my readers know that I always have book covers that pop, that people like to get them as a bit of a showpiece on their bookshelves and stuff like that, because they're really drawn to our book covers. Then we also have a logo for the publishing company that we consistently have on our book covers now, which we didn't used to as we've evolved. So now with the books associated with us, you'll see the logo, and any marketing tend to see me at the forefront, talking about not just my books but the other books that we publish as well. So
That's great, Adam. Thank you. Thank you all. And, I was thinking, Will, when you mentioned around branding a kind of list rather than yourself as an author, it made me think a little bit about Adam and Samantha. You publish in more than one area within a genre. And so, how do you think about each one of those sort of tangents needing its own identity because they potentially have a different reader? And how do you do that? How do you distinguish between your lit RPG versus your maybe more straight down the line sci-fi? And Samantha, for you, so many different romance subjects now. How do you kind of differentiate them? Is it inherently the same reader, or are they really distinctive, and do they need a distinctive approach?
I think that there's slight distinctions between the genres, and I think it's a good idea is always to look at what your peers are doing that are doing well in those genres to see what is trending and how you can make that fit with the brand that you've already created. So for me, like, I'm quite lucky because my US audience is my biggest audience and they love the Scottish elements to my books. So I can still pull those in, that Scottishness into every genre so that I'm still speaking to my brand as a whole, but I'm tweaking certain things, whether it's just the way that the cover looks for that genre compared to, so like my contemporary covers definitely have a distinctively different look to my romantic suspense covers, which tend to be moodier and really play into the Scottish, photographs of Scottish scenery, stuff like that. So I think it's just being smart about how you focus in on each genre and make sure that you're paying attention to what is working for other people in that genre without losing the thing that has already appealed to readers, your core readership,
Absolutely. Thank you. Adam, anything to add to that?
So for us, we have AP Beswick Publications, and then we've got dark fantasy romance and supernatural romance. We've got two different series there with two authors we've signed, and they do have spicy elements to their books. So we wanted to make that distinction between, so we didn't have any accidental readers picking up the books that weren't going to be appropriate for them or their kind of books. So we created an imprint for that side of the books, but it's all under the umbrella of AP Beswick Publications. And yeah, we have different social media channels that cater to different audiences. So what we found was, if I'm talking about the dark fantasy romance books, and then the next day talking about my dark fantasy books, it was the content about my books would go into the wrong readers and vice versa. So we quickly realized earlier on this year that we needed different channels for different genres. Now, that is, for me, what that's helped is just refine those channels. So, like for TikTok, for example, you can really train an algorithm to be more, well, it's interest-based rather than social media, in my opinion. So, I've got a lit RPG track on there that is just, whenever I'm scrolling through, it's just lit RPG content comes up, and I know on that channel, when I talk about the lit RPG books that we publish, that is predominantly going to go out and hit a lit RPG audience. And we've just done the same with the general fantasy books, and then we have the books where we talk about the spicy book content and stuff like that. And we've just kept it all separate, and that has worked really well. You've just got to be able to manage it. Like at the moment, that there is still only me and my wife Sarah who work full time for the business. So we have to manage all these accounts. So it's making sure you do it in a way that doesn't burn you out, and as I said, that you can manage.
Yeah, really interesting that you seem to have a really kind of, distinct strategy for each one of the books, and one doesn't necessarily cross over into the other perhaps as organically as it might elsewhere in other genres. Will, from your perspective, you've obviously mentioned that you on your list you have classics titles all the way up to sort of contemporary fiction. Are you finding that you have to think quite hard about how you position each one of those books, or what's your thought from a kind of publisher's perspective around how you position the books to find the right readers?
So yeah, how do we target books? I think we do have a different visual approach. So our poetry titles have a look. We try and convey that this is a list, this all hangs together. And I suppose in our cover designs, we try and evoke images or you might associate with certain genres. Like for modernist poetry, we might try and pun on those beautiful, is it Leonard Woolf? I've definitely got that name wrong. The Faber typographer from years ago, that sort of thing you can sort of signal to a reader. Then how do we find people? I suppose a big part of what we do in this country is via bookshops, so that we can sell them as a group of titles together. We can say, if it's a Jane Austen book, I'm going to flag her up again. She's one of our bestsellers. Then we can pitch that to places that she lived, or museums that might be interested. On more of a reader level, I guess we do it more through metadata, and it's about sort of putting as much information as possible out there, and it does get sucked up into various places. So like you're talking about Scottishness, I know that there's the readers, the books first, books from Scotland, and if you've got that as sort of tags in your metadata, then get sucked up and put into those listings. So that kind of thing I think is invaluable. And again, loads of research to try and work out where people are reading, and the bloggers that might be reviewing them, any sort of, I guess we're also interested in comparables, aren't we? So if you like this book, then you might like this one. And I think you really trust someone who's recommending things to you, even if they're maybe raving about it a bit too much. So if you can get it in front of someone that will recommend it to their friends, their followers, and I think that's probably a big part of the job.
That's great. And thank you. Some really, really good practical tips there. I think as you were talking, I made notes to say, to summarize, I suppose, look around you. What are your peers doing? How are they positioning their books? Think about who your audience type is, and a strong visual identity is really important, specifically if you have lots of different types of publishing going on, which ones suit the right audience, and, from a visual point of view, how you distinguishing them from one another. Where are your readers? Are they on Facebook? Are they on TikTok? Are they going to bookshops? That's something that we're seeing so much with authors who aren't necessarily making that connection between who their readers are and where their readers are. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. And then, Will, I'm really pleased you used the M word, metadata. I know it's maybe not the most glamorous part of what we do, but in my humble opinion, good metadata helps to sell more books. And it is worth spending that afternoon or that weekend doing it right, being thorough, making sure it's relevant. And you will see a difference when it comes to connecting with readers. So thank you. Okay, well, we'll move on. Still on the same theme, really, of connection with readers. And this is around kind of feedback. We know that book readers are book communities. They are vocal. They like to tell you what they think, what they like, what they don't like. We certainly hear that at IngramSpark. And I'd love to know what kinds of feedback you've heard as a result of your connection with your kind of readers. And, has that been helpful in terms of sort of shaping what you do next, in terms of connecting them in a deeper way going forward? I hope that makes sense. But Samantha, why don't you start? You must get quite a lot of feedback from readers about the books.
Yes, I do. And I think it's about understanding what is helpful for growing your readership and what is just, an individual opinion, because not everyone's going to enjoy your books. One of I think the most important one in recent years for me, the feedback has been about the visuals, and about how they didn't want to buy my covers that had the couples on them. And it became quite big, on Book Talk, to readers wanted what we call the discreet cover, where they were offered an alternative where it didn't have like a romantic couple on the cover for the romance genre. And I decided to give it a go. So I had my designer do a couple cover for the ebook edition that could also be available in paperback for those who do like that. And then an alternative cover that didn't have the couple on it, but still had the same language as the couple cover. And my sales, my print sales, my paperback sales increased quite significantly since I started doing that. Even my pre-orders for book events, it's the alternative paperback that is predominantly pre-ordered. So listening to that was like really, really important for growing my print sales. And it doesn't really make a difference in terms of like the ebook cover, because it's still available in paperback for those who want it. And we even experimented with the ebook covers and tried just using an alternative cover for the entire package, and it didn't work, because it's a different kind of reader in the respect that they want to know what it is they're buying online. It's more of an immediacy, whereas your print sales tend to be your core readers who are buying those, or a reader who primarily just buys paperback, you know? So that was one of the most important things for me, was being able to take that feedback and be able to cater to my online digital reader and my print paperback reader.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. Yeah. And, even thinking about the digital buyer being one that's more, that instant purchase.
Yeah.
I guess it doesn't matter what it looks like if you're sat on the train or the bus because you're using a Kindle, right?
Yeah.
Okay, really interesting. Thanks, Samantha. Anything else to add from the group on that? In terms of reader feedback or good or even bad feedback that you've received that's kind of shaped what you might have done next in a certain area? Or are you staying true to your mission regardless of the feedback?
Oh, I don't think we've got anything quite like that, but that has got to be one of the best applications of POD technology ever, that you can experiment with different sorts, like A/B testing. But I think probably what we do a lot of is B2B side. We have a team of sales reps that work for us and other small presses. They go into bookshops and try and make them order our books with varying levels of success. And I suppose what we do is almost trying to do a focus group. So we meet with them at least twice a year. We present our new title information that is ideally 6 to 12 months ahead of time, with everything sort of set up and ready to order, more or less. But at that point, I'll tell them what I think the key sales points are. But then they come back and they say, this is interesting. Why haven't you put that on the cover? That might make the difference. That cross-selling is really important. So putting other book covers by the same author, or trying to forge those connections with, if you like this book, you might like that on the back cover. We don't necessarily change what we're doing based on feedback, but we do take criticism on board. We don't tend to get a lot of people writing in and saying, I hated that bit of it. Why'd you publish that kind of book? I suppose our readers want, in a sense, maybe.
Yeah. No, that's it, Will. I think you are underplaying it. You are obviously a seasoned expert in terms of positioning things in the right way. And, I mean that wholeheartedly. I think if you're not hearing that kind of feedback, it means that you've got to assume that people like what you're doing. But you've taken me back to a period in my publishing career that always filled me with dread, which was when we would go. I used to sell, similar to how you've described, I used to sell Penguin Random House books to Waterstones. And I would go in seasonally and, present books to the buyers, and quite often would be met with a stony, uninterested, sometimes openly hostile reception about the kinds of things I was trying to suggest to them that their readers and, Waterstone's customers would love. And it didn't always go that way. And we had to take that feedback, from the people that are closest to the buyers and know the estates in the Waterstone shops. They kind of know the kinds of things that work for them. And it wasn't always easy for a big publisher to accept that, their designer or their publicity plan wasn't really what Waterstones were looking for. But I think it's important to find the right balance between staying, true to your brand identity, but also listening, and seeing what's happening around you as well. And yeah, I think, all really, really good feedback. So thank you. The next couple of questions are sort of two questions in one, and it's really around your presence and your activity online. I think you've all mentioned to a degree the usage of social media and how it works for you, but I was hoping we could maybe dig into that a little bit deeper, and each of you describe, firstly, how important your website is to sales, but secondly, how you are harnessing social media specifically to grow your audience, to connect with readers, and what are the pros and cons of that approach? What have you seen, and how has it changed? Are you still doing the same thing today that you were doing a year ago or 3 years ago, or have you had to really keep up with emerging technologies and trends? So whoever wants to take that on first, you're more than welcome.
I think it's changed hugely, hasn't it? Social media is kind of a nightmare with a lowercase n. I felt really lucky when we set up the business, April 2020, not an ideal time to be doing fledgling business stuff in many ways, but I'm quite techie. So I actually built our website just with WordPress, and it's e-commerce enabled. So that was, we were sort of ready to take cash quite quickly. Then social media was just so important, particularly, I'm afraid, Twitter. At that time, it's where the book community was, I felt. So we also had Facebook, which I didn't feel was quite right. Also had Instagram, which was quite visual, so that suits our style. We've got quite, I think, visually appealing titles, so that was quite good at getting traction. But Twitter was just overnight. I think we got like 10,000 followers in the first year, which for some is modest. For us was great, and that meant that we had a steady flow of people coming buying books. So yeah, then it did change a bit. I think we sort of all went back to work and we're all a bit miserable again. And so it went from being, I think, initially about 50% of our business was our e-commerce site. Nowadays, it's more like a fifth or something. So it's still important. And we have a subscription model, which I guess that's also part of the feedback. We have that sort of core relationship with people who have had a book a month for 5 years. And so they're really committed. We're really fond of them. We have dialogue. But I think nowadays social media has just changed and we're on all these different platforms, desperately trying to be an expert at all of them, but they change overnight. I don't feel an expert, I have to say. I've kind of pivoted. It feels almost unethical, he says. I don't know what other people feel, to be on Twitter or X, whatever we want to call it. I don't get so much engagement. We're kind of there because we want to be accessible by as many people as possible. I think most of our interest is now on Instagram, sort of blue sky. It's kind of it just, I think you were saying earlier, Adam, with so few people on the case, you just have to put your time where it's going to work best. And I think sometimes for us that's duplication across channels.
Yeah.
But, yeah, what about others?
Great, thanks, Will.
So yeah, for me, social media, well, I think we need to move away from calling it social media. It is interest media. You go on to the whichever platform you're choosing, it's things you are actively interested in that are being chronicalized and put in front of you when you're scrolling through your feed, whether that's on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. It's the stuff you're engaging with. The algorithms will go out and find more content that it thinks you're going to be interested in. And for me, it is integral. We find readers every single day. We've just had an 8-week period where we've needed to rely more on ads because the organic approach wasn't necessarily working as well over the summer. But we've, over the last week, we've switched all the ads back off and we're going all in with the organic approach again, which what I mean by that is creating content that doesn't cost you any money to see what is reaching your market, which you can then rinse and repeat that style once you find something that works for you and your brand. Now, what works for me might not work for Samantha, or it might not work for Will or any other authors out there, which is why you've always got to experiment with what kind of content you're putting out. But, we have a steadying income of sales through all our platforms, and because we take a wide approach, and that is because I've come to realize that people will go to their chosen place to purchase that product. So it's about making it available everywhere whilst putting that content out, be consistent with it. And again, the branding ties back into that. The people will associate the branding with you and your books, and then your organic reach will naturally increase over a period of time. But you have to be consistent with it. It's no use posting one day, then not posting for 5 days. You need to be posting on a regular schedule. And live streaming, I don't think there's enough of us taking advantage of what you can achieve through live streaming, and especially with, for example, TikTok Shop. So I did a live stream for a few hours on Friday, and in those few hours, I think it was about 4 hours, which I do a live stream every Friday, and I've got my regulars that come in and just chat and catch up. And it's basically I'm packing up any orders that have come in that morning, and I'm just chatting to people while I'm doing it. So I'm utilizing the time. I'm already packing the orders, but now I've found a way to monetize that whilst engaging with the community. And in that few hours, we did nearly £1,800 in sales. And I got everything packed up whilst I was on the stream. That's why it took 4 hours. But by the end of that stream, all those orders are packed and ready to go. And then I'm on with the next job in the afternoon, which at the moment is editing a very big book. So again, it's realizing what people want. And actually, there's a huge marketplace right now for live selling. And, you've got to have that confidence on camera to do that, or build that confidence up. But, I've been using social media for 3.5 years now, which is absolutely terrifying. And I'm full time, my wife's full time in the business, and we generate a livable income and business growth through using all these organic approaches. But yeah, live shopping, do not sit on it. I think for organically on TikTok Shop, there's other platforms you can look into again, but TikTok Shop is kind of the main marketplace that it's making books more accessible to people. They can literally tap on whilst they don't even have to leave the app. They can order the products. So yeah,
that's fantastic, Adam. And surely that's something that if 3 years ago someone had said to you, you can make close to £2,000 whilst doing what is a bit of a chore, let's face it, during the week, packing up orders for yourself, for your sort of direct to consumer enterprise, but you figured out a way of actually create that's content. That physical experience, that physical act is actually something that you can open up to your readers, which is quite fantastic.
But also what you can also do there is then download the live stream that you've done and then use software to create content it'll pull out content from that live stream. So anything that, themes interested, you might have done a showcase on a book series where you've just talked about it for a little bit. You can pull out all these little bits. So that 4-hour live stream, I could probably get 100 pieces of content that I could use and schedule throughout the next couple of weeks. It's making sure we're using the resources that are available to us. That, there's I think it's called Opus Clip. I think it's like $25-$30 a month. And you just put a video in, type in what kind of content you want, and it'll pull the content out of your videos, and it'll even make the videos with subtitles and organize it all for you. And then you can just download them and use them. Which again, it's creating that organic content for you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. That's great. Really fascinating. Samantha, did you have something to add?
I mean, I agree with everything Adam said about the social media aspect of it. I do also always like to tell aspiring authors, new authors, that, I've been using social media for 15 years, since I started publishing, basically, and it is evolving constantly. And at the drop of a hat, a platform can decide it's going to try and monetize your followers in a way that, is detrimental to you, because suddenly you're having to spend money in order to reach all these followers that you've spent years building up. It happened to me with Facebook. It's happening more on TikTok now as well. And, I do spend a lot more on ads than I've ever spent to keep the sales coming in. So I like to remind authors that there's one stable form of communicating with your readers, and that's your newsletter. Your newsletter is so important. And there's great ways to build your newsletter, like putting links in at the end of your books to bonus scenes that you've written, added extras, things that they have to sign up to your newsletter to get. And that's been so valuable to me for increasing my newsletter followers, collaborating and networking with other authors, doing swaps with newsletters, sharing each other's new releases, all of those things to keep readers engaged in your newsletter. And I just think it's equally, if not more so, important for the longevity of being able to communicate with your readers, because, as I said, social media is just, it constantly changes.
That's great. Yeah, I'm really glad someone said newsletters, because I agree. I think it's a really valuable source of information. And it's something that I think you've alluded to more eloquently than I will, but it's something you own, you have control of. No one's going to tell you tomorrow what your newsletter has to be. And so I'm really encouraged to hear that the newsletter is still kind of alive and well for you. And, do you find that your engagement levels are higher with your newsletters as they might than maybe some of your social media usage, or is it the same, or is it, how would you say it?
Yeah, I mean, I do engage consistently on social media, as an immediate form of finding new readers and engaging with your current readers. It's definitely, critical now as an author. But my newsletter, I have great engagement. I have between 40 and 50% open rate, which is pretty high. But it's very important to the community of authors that I'm in. We all see it as a very important thing. We're constantly strategizing with each other how to keep readers engaged with our newsletters, how to keep readers signing up to our newsletters. So I think it's become recognized that, just with how, sometimes devastating shifts have been. I had almost 80,000 followers on Facebook when, back in 2013. And now I can only reach about 100 of those 80,000 followers, with an organic engagement. So once we realized how quickly all of that hard work can be taken away by platforms, algorithm changes, decisions to monetize, we realized that this is the one thing that we have a little bit more control over. So yeah, I think it is extremely important, the newsletter.
Yeah. Wow. Absolutely. Well said. Thank you. Okay, well, the final question I have is hopefully a bit of a fun one, really. And it's around, some real practical advice that you can give. Let's say you are an author, or Will, from your perspective, a publisher, and you've got the book, it's edited, it's got a nice cover, or maybe we won't add the cover, but it's edited and it's ready, and you have £1,000 to spend. What would you do with that £1,000? Like, what's the best use for a resource like that? Because I think one thing that we're finding on the IngramSpark side is that authors they've done the hard bit, but they've done one of the hard things, which is write the book. And that's obviously the foundation to everything that comes next. But really, it's kind of just beginning from that point, because then you have a series of decisions to make. And maybe I was wrong to say that the book's being edited, because as we well know, a lot of books go out into the world having not been properly or well edited, and that's a problem. But the idea is here for you to think about when you were starting out, if you could start again, and you had that kind of finite resource to put towards something good for the book. What would you do with it? How would you do it? How has that sort of changed over time? Have there been examples of things that you didn't do that you wished you had at the beginning, or did do and spent time and money on that actually turned out to not be that valuable after all? So I hope that makes sense, and I hope we can end on that kind of hopefully light-hearted note around just where best to place your resource, really. So, Will, why don't you start?
I was trying to think, if we had a check for £1,000 for a book, what do we spend it on? I think probably one of the most important things that I feel we do, doesn't cost very much, is advanced reader copies. So ahead of time, get, I don't know, 50, 100, however many you can stretch to, copies of the book printed that you can send off to review, to bloggers, because then you've got people posting it online. If you're on socials, it means that you can, if you're eligible for prizes, then I think that's really important to enter them. I didn't make that point earlier about branding, but I think prizes are hugely important. And there are so many, and some you're almost guaranteed to be on a long list by entering, and that can be free publicity in a way. But if you end up being shortlisted or winning one which is well respected, then that can be a game changer. I'm trying to think what we spent money on that I wouldn't recommend. Some of the ads can be a bit dodgy. I think Meta ads were great, and I'm trying to think, there are some others we tried out in those early years and they were a bit of a waste of time.
That's great. Well, no, I think you've added a lot there, and I'm sure there'll be some crossover with Adam and Samantha in terms of what they would do. But Adam, why don't we hear from you?
Okay, so you've inspired me to create some kind of content on making a project and seeing what you can do with different price caps for a quality product at the end. But so £1,000, the book's already edited. I think primarily the largest portion of that budget for me would go on a book cover that would really emphasize the market and target those readers. I wouldn't spend any money on advertising, because I think you can very quickly fall into a trap. And for the amount of money you'd need to put in to get the returns with one book, it's you'd be incredibly lucky just to break even. So yeah, predominantly that would be a book cover, buying a software. I'm just looking at what I use, Vellum, for formatting books. I think that's been a game changer for me. I think there's Atticus. Is it called Atticus? Because Vellum's for Mac only software. whereas Atticus, I think, is available across multiple computers. And then something like Pro Writing Aid or Grammarly subscription for the year, because I think, again, just putting your work into there helps you refine your writing before it gets professionally edited, but not everyone might have access to an editor. And you could buy all those three things and probably come away with a couple of £100 spare. So I could probably do that on £800 budget.
Great. Well, you go. Adam's given us change. Samantha, can you improve on that?
I agree with all of that. I use Vellum, I use Pro Writing Aid. I've spent money on ad courses. I now have someone manage my ads because no matter how much money I spent on ad courses, I just could not wrap my head around them. So I pay someone to do my ads, and that's worked out really well for me. I agree, like, definitely you spend money on a good cover. I think a good cover does work. But if I think about what I did when I very first started out, it's what Will said. I was concentrating on, there were book bloggers at the time, it's influencers now. I was concentrating on getting the books in front of influencers, because that's your most organic way to make sales, and there's always, luck always plays into this game. And hopefully, you have an influencer where they make a TikTok or an Instagram reel, something, and it takes off. And sometimes that's all it takes to be a little bit of kindling, But yeah, for the practical, I agree with Adam. Getting software that's going to save you money in the long run. Because I used to spend a fortune to have someone format my books until Vellum came along. So
Right.
I do think that those are all really important ways to save money in the long run.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And I guess we haven't really left enough time to talk about, a critically important subject in the world of publishing, and that is AI and tools that are available for authors and publishers around things like typesetting and, sort of formatting. I would say less so design myself personally, but, I think ours is an industry that's going to figure out creative ways to harness AI technology. And I can see some of these areas of, the preparation process being benefited greatly by AI advancements. I'm sure, Vellum and Atticus are likely already harnessing some of that technology today. So, well, thank you. I hope that for listeners, there have been various things that you've been able to write down. I know I've made a whole page worth of notes for things to think about. The idea here is that you go away with something new to try. And I think our guests today have shared several things for you to go away and think about if you haven't been already. So I'll finish by giving each of you just the final word to say where people can find you. What would you like to make sure that people know in terms, is it a website? Is it a social media channel? So Will, where can people find out more about Reynard?
Primarily on our website, renardpress.com. We're on, I think, most of the social medias, although I have to say we tried out TikTok and clearly haven't got Adam's touch. Or indeed Sam. So yeah, so not so much on TikTok, but just about everywhere else, I think we can be found.
Fantastic. Thank you. Adam?
Probably our website's the best spot, which is apbeswickpublications.com. And again, just across all social media channels, just look up AP Beswick and I'm pretty sure something will come up. It's on Instagram. I don't have an account under my pen name. That's under Northern Writer, because I started that account when I was writing my first book many, many years ago.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Samantha?
Yeah, my website, which is authorsamanthayoung.com, and then I'm primarily on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under @authorsamanthayoung.
Fantastic. Well, please do go and look at those websites. Follow our guests here on their social media channels. You will continue to learn more and see what, really high standard of publishing looks like. And I'll just finish by saying thank you very much for joining us. Thanks very much, everybody.